for joining us for the Call for Code live stream. So, we're about to get underway with the workshops, and I just wanted to introduce the first speaker. Oh, I can see myself on Twitch now. Amazing. This is very meta because it's like a few seconds behind. But anyway, so the first speaker up, I just wanted to intro them in. One, to also make sure that this is working in production. Turns out, yes. Hopefully, you all can hear me. If you have any questions, please reach out in venue or reach out on the Twitch stream or reach out on the Call for Code Slack. But otherwise, let's get underway. And this first session is going to be really handy to help refine those ideas that you've all got. So I'm about to bring in Leo from the IBM Garage, who's an absolute master. He's an 11th level master in design thinking. Let's go with that. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to switch the scenes over and bring Leon in to talk all about design thinking. So here's Leon.
Thanks a lot, Steve. It's always great to play with you and be on these webinars to share great content with people and get them started with their hackathons and their code efforts. So welcome everyone. This is a quick design thinking bootcamp for Call for Code 2021. I'm going to go through some of the core principles that we use in design thinking, give context to why it can really help you in this Call for Code effort. And by showing you a practical example of some work that we did a couple of years back with CFA and Red Cross around disaster response for bushfires. So you're all joining today to take on the challenge for Call for Code, coding and deploying solutions to some of mankind's biggest challenges. Hopefully you'll have seen that there's some great starter kits that you can use to inspire you to get more data, to get and appropriate resources around things like solving hunger and responsible production of crops and sustainable water utility and sanitation. But there's a whole lot more, and of course you can choose your own, journey in what you'd like to choose as a challenge to take on. But hopefully that they'll provide a great founding for your endeavors. So with that, let's learn a little bit about design thinking today in the next 45 minutes. So design thinking is really about understanding people and their needs, and then working through the complex scenarios and tasks that they have to get done in order to design solutions that are meaningful and purposeful for them. And I think this is really important if we're looking at, for example, farmers who require water for their crops to be sustainable in their growth and development without impacting others. That we really try to really deeply empathize and deeply connect with these folks, really step into their shoes and live a day, and from that, and observing and crafting our way through, we can come up with solutions that work best for them. So we really want to jump into people's lives with this. So be mindful of that as we go through these activities. And so often we talked about in IBM and IBM Design Thinking and our design studios and the garage, a couple of core principles. The first one being that we're really focused on user outcomes. And from that, that's where our solutions will be derived. So maybe put simply, we might create some high-level technology solutions that can be very impactful. But if ultimately the end user is not adopting that, or if it's doesn't work in the harsh environment in which they're in, it might ultimately prove fruitless, right? So we need to begin with trying to understand what those users are trying to achieve as an outcome and the context by which they're using these applications as our grounding point. We also talk a lot about diverse empowered teams, and that's because we would like to bring in different perspectives of this problem. So just maybe relating it back to that farmer situation, thinking about the local community in which they interact with, or the supply chain in which they get their crops out to market. But also it can apply to your development team. So having some folks who might be really well grounded in architecture to really help through the management and as we go from building a prototype into scaling, or it might be around having a subject matter expert like a data scientist to help you through that. But also people bringing their own experiences to the fore as well. So I'm turning 40 next week. And so for me, maybe as a midlife crisis, I might have a particular perspective, a particular energy level that's a bit different than my younger brothers and sisters. Or conversely, technology adoption for the elderly community is something that we need to be very mindful of, and designing solutions that they can feel comfortable with, as an example. And so from that, we derive this restless innovation, reinvention and innovation. The purpose, I guess, is that we're constantly looking to improve the systems that we create, and we're constantly curious about our assumptions and testing them out, and building that further and forth. And maybe for a developer in particular, it might be fun to experiment with different developer services and APIs as a way to see, okay, well, can this add value or not, as an example. So with that, without dwelling too much on these principles, human problems is what matters when we're looking through a design thinking perspective. We want to focus on that and create a living canvas of material. So as we're going through and running these workshop exercises, the intent is that you're putting pen to paper or keyboard strokes to virtual pinboards of your ideas, of your assumptions, of your plans and strategies that are focused on human matters. As you get into the code and the development, you'll come back to reassess that. So a good example of how this all strings together is we'll talk later on about user needs and user statements and vision statements. And you'll find that they're kind of similar to epics and user stories in the way that they're crafted. So there is this really great link between design thinking and agile development, as an example. So it's not to say that we won't get to technical solutions. We do. It's just the framing is around human problems. And as we said before, we want to take that diverse look. And just finally, as it is a living canvas, I want you to know the intent with Post-it notes is that they should be disposable and recyclable. So as you come through and make your ideas, put down your assumptions. You might be wrong, but you'll go back in a moment's time and recorrect that. Or after getting feedback, as people interact with your ideas and your assumptions, you'll course correct them. But it's important that you write them down. So let's go through a case study. I want to tell you a quick story about some work that we did back in 2019. It was for Call for Code. We were looking at, we collaborated with the CFA and Red Cross to look at a disaster response. And of course, this was, by the way, before the big bushfires that occurred in December 2019. But we had heard cases of townships that were impacted by fire, and we wanted to sort of take a look with our design team at IBM to see whether we could examine this and help bring to the fore some interesting ideas, but also importantly interesting data about what had happened, why did this happen, and how we might go about designing a better solution to preparing and reacting to fire responses, and also what happens in the follow-up. So as you can see, that there's a number of things that went wrong for this township. Interestingly, the radio was their key point of contact, and if you speak to people in rural communities, that ABC radio is a great and trusted source for their information. But that did mean that between the broadcasts of, hey, there's a big fire on, there's an emergency, hearing the cricket scores, for example, led to a lot of confusion about the seriousness of the incoming disaster that struck this township. And there was a lot of other things in between in terms of miscommunication and services that were supposed to work that didn't. So with that understood, and imagine as you're going through your starter kits, as an example, you'll have a a broad understanding of what this problem is. You'll have some data sources about how it affects people's lives. The purpose then of design thinking is to help frame that, to move it forward. So a good way to do that is to write an opportunity statement that helps sort of craft what is the experience that you're looking to change or improve and focus on. Who are the people impacted by that, and to what benefit would it be to solve this problem for the user, for the community, and others. And when you're doing this, I really want you to fall in love with the problem. The intent here is having a really deep understanding of what the pain is around the improve part. And when you're thinking about solving this, it's not to immediately jump into a solution when we think about solving this well. Rather, we're talking about the impact of getting that done. So think of this as falling in love with a problem by writing an opportunity statement. With that done, it might be well worth then exploring who are the people that interact with this. And my favorite way to do that is a stakeholder map, and sort of listing different organizations and different groups. You might find affinity with these, so you start to cluster some of these tickets. You'll see that that's quite a common thing in what we do with design thinking. And then moving through and seeing and validating some of these different stakeholder groups. And so when we did this, it was quite interesting to find places that were unexpected, like the surf club or the local childcare centre actually were key organisations in the community that really helped people when both when the disaster hit, but then also in terms of recovery. So, and of course, there were the familiar medical services and support services, but having this broader map helped us understand where the affinities lay and the broad nature by which people can who are affected by fire, and who prepare for fires and recover from them, the types of folks that they interact with. So start with the organizations and their different affinity, and then maybe think about the individuals. And as a quick example, you might find, psychologists, for example, in various support services, though they sit in different organizations, they might have a familiar method or connection. As an example of the intricacies of, how you can map out your stakeholder map, and play around with it, see if there are these different relationships and such when you go through that. So the next thing is an empathy map, and this is a very common tool to be using in design thinking. It's a way for us to really deeply to begin to deeply appreciate it and empathize with the user. So we chose Amy, who was a resident of this community and a small business owner, and explored what life was like for her. And it's really, when you do an empathy map, I'd really encourage you to find real data on real people and their real circumstance. Make it very grounded. Make it that maybe you could even literally talk to Amy, that someone that can give you these data points, or when you're creating these personas, that it's you're talking almost as though Amy is in the room with you and defending Amy's perspective. So as you're going through the solutioning, for example, Amy wouldn't like that because of these reasons, or et cetera, et cetera. And part of this is about explaining people's perspectives, and as you can see, what they think, feel, say, and do. But it's a beginning of exploring not just what people do and say. If you think about it, is very tangible evidence. We can find records of the actions that of what people take, and direct feedback of what they may say. The intangible evidence here about the thinks and feels is an exciting place for us to really dive into the detail of empathizing with people, because feels begins with an emotional state. So it might be a negative, like anger, fear, confusion, or even the positives. And we should map the positives too, about feeling confident and calm and happy even. And from those emotional states, why are they feeling calm? let's record that down. And then also in terms of what they're thinking, maybe a good way to differentiate the think and does is, as an example, is if you've ever filled out a form at a government form or a bank form, and you're filling it out, and you're thinking to yourself, why do I need to fill this out? Shouldn't you have this information? What's the relevancy of this? Or you've asked me 1 to 5. I don't understand what a 4 is. That's examples of what people are thinking. But if I just looked at what they're doing, I can see that, well, they've completed 10 out of 10 tick boxes on the form. So that examination of what people are thinking really helps us drive a better understanding of their pains and the gains as they go through their tasks. So again, make empathy maps grounded. Think about the visible and invisible evidence as you go through this. And then I'd encourage you to take a look at what we call the Asis scenario. So looking at a process and then sort of breaking it down into some key steps. And from that, you're able to see in this example, when we started to experiment with this, what actually happens before, during, and after a fire is there's this moment that happens when fires are in the area, but it's actually quite different from when a fire is nearby, which is actually quite different when the fire affects you. Those are actually 3 unique states. And literally when we, it's quite concerning actually. When we looked at when fires affecting people, it really is chaotic. There was any number of circumstances of what people may do. And just writing that down really helped us focus to understand, maybe we can't help with that chaos aspect, that the situations are so dynamic that, looking at an application on your phone when you're literally at a life and death situation is probably not the right choice. Where we can focus our efforts very well is in other matters. And as you'll see through this visual diagram here, of course, the post-it notes, and you'll see different colors of post-it notes. What's interesting is you'll see that there are clusters of pain points of what people are thinking and feeling, and that's often a good guide to where to focus on when developing a solution. If you see these clusters, give a name to that pain or that opportunity that you're seeing. Often you can, and later, what I'd encourage you to do is voting. So you can see that there are some silver dots on some of the post-it notes there. So we went through an exercise with our team in silence for a couple of minutes. We're given a certain amount of dots, and then we could weight what we felt were the most important tickets in terms of moments that people prepare or act or recover from fire, where we wanted to focus our efforts. And you could see from the fire nearby, right in the middle there, there was a whole lot of weighting. People felt that was really important to focus in on. And so get feedback from different people, your team, maybe perhaps the support team from Core for Code, or people who are actually being affected by these responses, whether it's around water and farming or fire response, as a way to validate that. So with that done, as I said, we like to vote, and by doing that, it's basically helping us to work out where do we want to focus. And we saw in this instance that having a lack of connectivity or the preparation that was kind of disconnected from the reality of the situation were things that we thought that we could do better about addressing. But yeah, you definitely want to prioritize, because there's probably, literally 1,000 different things that you could do, 1,000 places, that you could focus. It's important that as we go through this, we're constantly, re-examining where do we want to focus our efforts. It's at that point that now we've got so let's recap. We've got a great understanding, or a better understanding, of who's being affected by these matters. We've planned out a little bit about what we're seeing, how things affect them. It's now time to jump into ideation. And when we do this, we love to do diverge, converge response to this, which is to say, go wild with some big ideas that may initially even sound crazy, but and then from that get feedback and sort of look at the rationale and unpack that and see if there's a strong affinity and fit to what you declared earlier as the key pain points. And from that, you'll then be able to do another round of voting to sort of think about the feasibility. And so with this, when we talk about wild and big ideas, you know, my personal rule book is usually 70 to 80% sort of sensible, vanilla, rooted in known tech solutions or industry solutions, or reflections on common patterns, but leave some space for like the 20% of what we call wild ducks that are just really out there, that might be completely transformative. And often the way that we see these big ideas written down is it might just be a declaration of something, sort of like I don't know, in the case of fires, maybe summoning a storm, and it could just be an idea like that, and it's very abstract and very open, without like real definition around how it will directly solve the problem, but it's enough that it will inspire conversation and interaction with you and your team, and those that you require feedback from, to sort of drill into, well, what does that mean? Could that be, for example, directly analogous so that you do cloud seeding, for example, or is it more that you'll try to deluge the skies with a whole bunch of water from multiple planes, as an example. So it allows you that creativity to fill in the blanks. So with that, though, I'm sure that you'll find some great ideas that you want to hone in on. As we said before, again, do another round of voting to really prioritize. And when we do that, you will still be left with a bunch of great ideas that, as you can see, of the many that you will still want to drill down into even further. And so maybe a good way to do that in terms of finding fit, the ones that you want to focus in on initially and as a priority, is to use some sort of feasibility matrix. So here we've got feasibility is expensive or cheap. That could be in terms of effort, not just in cost, or it might be more attainable, so doability, I suppose. And then the relative importance to the user, to society or organizations that try to solve this problem. And a good place to start is often that no-brainers in the top right. If it's extremely achievable that we can get this done and it's high impact, why not focus on that first, and go through that. I will say one thing though, as I've gone through this, I've often seen some really interesting ideas in that top left, which is it's very high impact, but it seems really difficult to get done. And remembering that Call for Code's an attempt to take on some of mankind's biggest challenges, I think you may find that some of these seem insurmountable, but maybe that is an interesting place to start as well. So I'd encourage you to move through and be bold enough to try different experiments, even on the things that you think might be quite difficult. Because if we get a breakthrough on that, hey, we can literally change the world here. So with that, as you've now got some big idea, let's start to storyboard that. Let's bring that into, for example, 6 simple panels that explains the context. It's Friday, it's Saturday at 1 p.m. Here's the scenario that I'm greeted with as this user conducts their work, and they're impacted by something. So you set some sort of context, you set the action of what's occurring and how that person responds to that action, in 6 simple frames. If you can explain your ideas in 6 simple frames, we feel that you're probably on a winner. And in that, it would be very tempting, of course, to explicitly write out the UI or wireframes and screens and all the developer services that you'd be using. But I'd encourage you to keep it at a very high level. Focus more on the context and how people are moving around and how that impacts. And from that, because you will have time to focus on that and on the days of effort or weeks that you'll apply later on. At this point, we want to find a way that we can simply communicate this idea and its context to anyone. So with that, let's talk about vision statements. So remember at the very beginning, we're talking about opportunity statements that sort of help frame, what is the problem, who's being impacted, and why it might be a great, why it might be great if we solve this. A vision statement feels similar. It's about the who, the what, and the wow. And in this case, now we're talking about the solution to be delivered. And it's quite, it has a strong affinity to epics in agile development of talking at a higher level about what we're intending to create without going necessarily into the deeper details of how that will be done. But it's enough to talk about a very important aspect, which is the wow. And this will help you with your pitch. What's the thing that I can do now that takes 5 minutes that used to take 5 days? Or the thing that, in this case for Amy, that she's able to do now for the first time that she never felt or experienced before. So this is where you get to really focus on what the impact will be and declare that. And you'll see here that we've got 2 different vision statements. We were trying to decide which perspective we wanted to take. Is it from the Amy, who's the small business owner, or is it more from emergency services? So we wrote down both. But you'll find that you'll need to start coming into who are we going to focus on and what that interaction is. In this case, there's a double-sided marketplace essentially of people that we could serve here with our solution. So with that, let's talk about assumptions and risks. So we've got this big idea. We've got this wow, we want to achieve this outcome. There's probably a whole host of assumptions that we're making, and so it'd be really useful to declare those assumptions and declare what we see as risks to this project. And here you'll see that I've written down some big tent poles of adoption, technical development, and environmental metrics. These are by no means a comprehensive list. There could be an extraordinary amount of different tent poles that you'll have facing your solution, or you might have only a few of those, but they might be a really good grounding spot to think about. So, for example, with regulations, thinking about the sensitivity around data and privacy might be an interesting dimension to apply as you're thinking through your solution. Assumptions and risks, and much like all the other work that we've done, should be something that we're constantly coming back to and proving or disproving. So was GDPR an issue with this? How might we work around that if it is, in terms of changing the experience so that those matters don't impact us as much? How do we prove that people will be familiar with this new experience? Maybe I need to go out and put some concept designs in front of people and get them to click on those clickable prototypes to see whether or not the user flow makes sense to them, as an example. So this is going to, as you could start to imagine, this will help us start to think about how we're going to run experiments to test these assumptions and risks. And that's actually where we're going to get to in a moment. But of course, we could be there busy testing everything, right? So where do we want to focus? We probably want to focus on the things that are the most impact and that we really don't know very much about. So the things that could really blindside us because we don't have the right knowledge around, and so we'll need to go out and do some tests around that. That's probably the right place to start in terms of the priorities of the big risks to take on first. And then when we do that, oh, I've left out a slide, I think. I'm going to jump ahead then. Wrong order. So if you think about it, we've got these assumptions and risks. We probably want to go out and test them. So here's a really quick example of that. Actually, I'll talk about a favorite story of mine. We were looking at developing an iPad application for for Canadian timber and forestry folks, park rangers, to use while they're out in the woods to measure the quality of the trees, because iPads have great sensors and cameras and all sorts of things in them. The thing is, though, it gets really cold in Canada, as you can imagine, negative 35 degrees and such. So one of our assumptions was, will the iPad work in such extreme conditions? Let's go out and test that. Let's, for example, give an iPad and get a park ranger to simply fill out a form and take a photo in those conditions. We'll be able to measure the success if they're able to complete that form and take that photo without any additional work or any modifications to the process. Who will test that, of course, is a park ranger after we've developed a very simple form for them to fill out. These experiments are really important because it helps ground to see whether we're on the right track, right? And from that, makes sure that if the design solution is an iPad app, it does work in those extreme conditions. Let's continue on with that. If it doesn't work in those extreme conditions, maybe we need to change the design point and create an app for a rugged laptop, or simply use pen and paper maybe to take some manual notes and then go back to the truck, and you can do more in-depth calculations back there. So when you're thinking through Core for Code, you may not get the access to, for example, go out to some of these remote communities and such and run these experiments. But I think it'd be very important nonetheless to record these down and to say, hey, as part of our next steps, we'd love to go out and test some of these matters, and here's the sequential order in which we're thinking about. I think that will help ground this and get people excited by, hey, let's give you the opportunity to go out and run these experiments. And when you do create this solution, you're probably looking for the impact that you'll make, right? So in this case, if we provide Amy with this ability to check in and receive updates, we should see that she will observe certain behavior and outcomes. So if I provide X, I'll see JKL. And what's really interesting if you approach this as a scientist, right, is you're declaring what you're expecting to see. Do you see that or not? And if you don't, well, why is that? You're curious about the outcome, right? And that's what good innovators do, is that they're really curious to learn. We put together this bold proposition. How does it work? What was the impact of this? And then course correcting. You might find some really unexpected delight. You might also find some key blockers you never thought about. But this hypothesis will also kind of strongly links back to, if I was an investor, I'd be thinking about ROI, for example, or some other key metrics that you want to make sure gets delivered. So maybe when it comes to, for example, the water sanitation, that it reaches a certain benchmark of how pure the water can be that's safe for human consumption, as an example, with the new system that you've developed. So some of these metrics can be really important, and also it's just showing that you can derive an outcome from what you've delivered. So from all that, you're going to probably come up with a really amazing concept design and solution, backed by some pretty incredible developer services and cloud infrastructure that's robust and scalable. And this is how all these design elements in design thinking flow into that, is that we've got these things that we want to go out and test. We've got these vision statements that are closely aligned to ethics. We've got more granular user need statements that link closely to user stories. We've got a backlog of work to be done, which is kind of similar to a prioritized backlog of development, right? So there's quite a strong affinity to the development process. Of course, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you'd still need to get done, like the architecture, setting up your DevOps flow. And I know that we can help make that a lot easier. And so there's some great services that you can use. While you do that, though, you may, if you've got, particularly for the sort of design business folk within your teams, they may go out and do some user adoption tests to sort of see, hey, can this be really sticky and be adopted by our user and reach those goals? And some ideas of like Wizard of Oz, where it seems like it's a feature complete solution, but actually behind the scenes a lot of manual work. A fake door, which is essentially like a sign up page just to see whether there's an initial demand. Maybe taking a sort of product or service and that's already in market and sort of just slightly modifying it with your attributes to see whether or not there is, that there is actually that demand. Or maybe just creating a pop-up, so like a timed event, something where that you build a momentum and demand for, and people come in and test it, instead of releasing something that's a big scaled out release. You put all your resources in, a couple of days or weeks, or even a couple of hours, to see whether or not those interactions can work, and from that prove that there's a demand and prove that the underpinnings of your solution make sense. So with that, we went through a lot of different concepts today, but let's bring it all the way back up to the top. Design thinking is a really great way to help you focus on the human element. And as we are taking on some of mankind's biggest challenges, I think that's a really great place to start, is to understand the context, the pain around some of these processes, and thinking about the feasibility of how we'll get that done. And then in terms of exploring these ideas, working with a diverse set of different people, from the user, the industry associations, governments, technology providers, your own team even, in viewing how we might explore this. And just be prepared that you can make mistakes and you can try and learn and experiment. Declare those assumptions, declare what you're thinking and what you'll act upon as that living model. And as you move through that, because it's rare, if ever, that you get it exactly right from the moment that you plan it. There'll be a lot of things learnt along the way, and embrace that. That moving through that uncertainty is going to make you, closer to the truth. And I think also it helps you fall in love with the problem. And from that, you'll build a great solution. So Steve and audience, thanks very much for taking the time with us today to walk through how design thinking can help you plan and build a great solution for Call for Code 2021.